Hello guys, welcome to Knowledge and Insights, a channel aimed at explaining the world in a realistic and pragmatist way. Today we will be discussing if Joe Biden really is as terrible as people think. At the moment of recording this video, the polls show that Joe Biden has a 38% approval rate. Over the past few months, his poll numbers have sunken even below those of Donald Trump, a man who Biden has routinely referred to as the worst president in history. Using the same logic, can we now say that Joe Biden must be an even worse president, making him the new worst president in history? Well, is this fair? What has Joe Biden really achieved, and how bad has he really been? In order to answer these questions, we will go through all that Biden has done and draw our conclusions. At this channel, we like to start off positively, and for this reason, we will first look into all the good things that Biden has done. The first achievement of Biden is that after decades of struggle, he finally managed to get the infrastructure legislation passed, making him the first president to achieve this. This was a major win for both Democrats and Republicans, and because of this act, many more US families will finally have access to high-speed internet in the future. Another major achievement of Biden's is that under his presidency, approximately 8.3 million jobs were created, which is an unprecedented record. This record goes along with the fastest decline in unemployment ever, a strong decrease in the number of people who are reliant on unemployment checks, and reducing the deficit by a whopping $350 billion. This reduction makes the current deficit smaller than it was at the end of President Trump's term. Although all of these achievements should be recognized and applauded, unfortunately, the list of things that have gone wrong is a bit longer. The first and perhaps most overlooked of Joe Biden's mistakes was canceling Operation Legend amidst a record crime wave in US cities. To tackle the massive crime rates, Donald Trump had initiated Operation Legend, which deployed federal officers to aid local law enforcement, helping to arrest more than 6,000 criminals. In a time in which at least 12 major cities broke annual homicide records, Biden has decided to cancel this operation, with terrible crime as a consequence. And it seems like the only justification for this is that he just wanted to undo Trump's work. But this is not the only thing that went wrong. In the midst of a historic labor shortage, Biden pushed vaccine mandates, forcing employers to fire unvaccinated workers. He did this at the exact wrong moment. At the time of imposing this mandate, there were more than 11 million unfilled jobs, and in doing this, he devastated the US economy. Okay, so now we will take a look at Biden's foreign policy. Biden is often blamed, especially by Trump, for allowing the war in Ukraine to happen. Although this is not completely true, we can definitely argue that before the invasion, Putin had calculated how his US opponent would react, and it seems that attacking Ukraine with Joe Biden as a sitting president was a risk that Putin was willing to take. But why? It is very likely that Biden's disastrous retreat from Afghanistan plays a big part in this. Biden's retreat marked the end of a 20-year war and basically undid all that was achieved in the country. During the retreat, Biden was unable to successfully evacuate US citizens and their Afghan allies. Worst of all, Biden allowed for the whole of Afghanistan to be overrun by the Taliban, a longtime enemy of the US. Not only that, but he also took away all of the military aid, leaving the Afghan military handicapped in their fight against the Taliban. It was a big mistake to pull out of Afghanistan at a time when just before the retreat, the US had made the Afghan military dependent on their intelligence and systems, promising them that the aid would not end. This devastating miscalculation of Joe Biden, who for some reason thought that the Afghans were prepared to run the country by themselves and that they were capable of defending themselves. This blow to his reputation caused a great loss of respect on the world stage, allowing leaders like Putin but also Ali Khamenei of Iran to lose their respect for the president, not even to speak of the sleepy image that he already had at the time. Okay, so moving on. We will now be discussing the most common critiques of Joe Biden. These are his war on fossil fuels, unleashing the worst border crisis in US history, and contributing to the extreme inflation hitting the country. The first problem mentioned is quite obvious. By destroying domestic fossil fuel production, he has not only taken the livelihood of workers away, but also made the US reliant and dependent on the production of other countries, something that has recently caused him great embarrassment when he practically begged the Saudi prince for help and gave the awkward box. Even worse is that the intended result, lower emissions to save the climate, is not even achieved. This is because the places where the US now gets its oil just does the same thing as the US would have. So the only thing that Biden did regarding fossil fuels is miss out on its profits and make America more dependent, with gasoline prices going through the roof as a consequence. In defense of Joe Biden, it must be said that he couldn't have known that the war in Ukraine would happen. But even absent of this war, it cannot be justified how he destroyed the US fossil fuel sector. Next up, we have the border crisis. It has been reported that there were 1.7 million encounters with illegal immigrants, an astounding number that is 4 times the number of the year before. This large number has put a huge pressure on all of the border states and their local economies, not even taking organized crime into account. Allowing the US to be flooded with unidentified immigrants has been a huge mistake that will definitely boost cartel activity. This mistake will take years to undo by identifying and locating all of these scattered around people. Then at last, we have the problem of extreme inflation. Before we head into this, I must note that this is a worldwide phenomenon and that high inflation during these times would have happened under any presidency. But that does not exclude that Biden has definitely contributed to the current inflation. As the inflation could be a video on its own, I will quickly list all the things that contributed to it without going into too much detail. So how did Biden help the inflation skyrocket? Well, he made it worse by 1. Excessive and wasteful spending, including $1,400 payments to every American, $260 billion to state and local governments, and $242 billion to the expansion of unemployment benefits. 2. Sanctions aimed at cutting Russia's energy revenues, which have sent the oil and gas prices soaring. 3. Not fighting inflation by influencing demand and gas prices, this way manually stopping the inflation from getting higher, but instead putting the blame on Putin solely, calling it Putin's price hike. 4. keeping the interest rates low and attempting to support the economy through hundreds of billions of dollars in asset purchases, creating the perfect environment for inflation to occur. Okay, now that we have gone through all that Biden has done during his presidency, we can now finally move on to the insights part of this video and start concluding how he has performed as a president up to this point. Even though he still has some time to improve or mitigate his mistakes, I think that it is fairly obvious that Joe Biden has not been the greatest president. Even when leaving out all of the facts that we described earlier, I think that the majority of Americans can feel that their financial situation has been severely hurt ever since he entered office. Not to speak of how he presents himself to the world and appears to be incapable of running a country. The nickname Sleepy Joe certainly does not benefit his image, and it can be argued that he doesn't even have the mental ability for the job anymore at his age. Taking into account the approval ratings painfully highlights this. In my opinion, Joe Biden truly is one of the worst presidents that the US has ever seen. I get this feeling because it is a full package or combination of flaws. When comparing him to other presidents, we can see that most had a few things going against them. What is unique about Joe Biden's presidency is that it encompasses the sleepy image, his lack of actions, bad foreign policy, and insufficient measures. This problematic cocktail of things going against him is what makes Joe Biden one of the worst presidents. For example, Trump, arguably the most controversial president ever, had one major thing going against him, which was his personality and impulsive behavior. This personality was one that you could either love or hate. But if you examine his policies and what he has actually done, he was not that bad of a president after all, especially when comparing him to Biden. So in conclusion, I do think that the polls reflect the current reality in the USA, which is that Joe Biden is not the guy to lead the country through these difficult times. Well, this was my research on Joe Biden. Thanks so much for watching. It is much appreciated. Please support our effort by liking and subscribing to Knowledge and Insights. And make sure to check my previous video out on the real reason why Russians support Putin. See you next time.